Russia has a long and troubled history when it comes to its penal system. From the days of Tsarist Russia to the Soviet Gulag system, punishment has often been brutal and unforgiving. This legacy of harsh treatment continues today, particularly within the walls of Russia's women's prisons. These institutions, often located in remote and desolate areas, have become notorious for their inhumane conditions and the suffering endured by the women held within their walls. The world caught a glimpse of this grim reality with the high-profile detention and imprisonment of American basketball star Brittney Griner. Her experience, while harrowing, is not unique. Countless women, many of whom are political prisoners or simply victims of a system that prioritizes punishment over rehabilitation, face similar or even worse conditions daily. These prisons, often overcrowded and under-resourced, serve as stark reminders of the human cost of Russia's authoritarian system. The stories that emerge from these facilities paint a bleak picture of human rights abuses, neglect, and despair. It is a system that demands scrutiny and reform, a system that cries out for the world to listen to the voices of the women trapped within its grasp. Stepping into one of Russia's toughest women's prisons is like entering a nightmare. The air is thick with despair, a suffocating blend of fear, hopelessness, and resignation. The walls, often crumbling and damp, seem to close in, suffocating any glimmer of hope that may try to penetrate the gloom. Overcrowding is rampant. Women sleep on rusty bunk beds crammed tightly together, their meager possessions spilling onto the grimy floor. Privacy is non-existent. The stench of sweat, urine, and sickness permeates everything, a constant reminder of the unsanitary conditions and the lack of basic hygiene. The days bleed together in a monotonous routine of forced labor, meager meals, and constant surveillance. The women, stripped of their dignity and autonomy, are reduced to numbers, their individuality crushed under the weight of the system. These prisons are not just places of confinement, they are instruments of dehumanization, designed to break spirits and crush any semblance of resistance. The world must look beyond the walls and acknowledge the human suffering that festers within. The overcrowded conditions within Russia's women's prisons are a breeding ground for despair and disease. Women are packed into cramped cells and barracks, often forced to share beds or sleep on the floor. The lack of personal space and privacy exacerbates the psychological toll of confinement, fostering a sense of hopelessness and despair. Basic hygiene is a luxury many can only dream of. Access to clean water and sanitation facilities is severely limited. Women often have to share a single, filthy toilet with dozens of others. The scarcity of sanitary products further degrades their dignity and poses serious health risks. Medical care, when available, is often rudimentary and inadequate. Chronic illnesses go untreated and injuries are often met with indifference. The combination of overcrowding, poor sanitation, and inadequate medical care creates a breeding ground for infectious diseases, further endangering the lives of the women imprisoned. These conditions, far from meeting any standard of humane treatment, are a violation of fundamental human rights. The international community cannot stand idly by while women suffer and die within these overcrowded and disease-ridden institutions. Physical and psychological abuse casts a long shadow over Russia's women's prisons. Reports from former inmates and human rights organizations paint a chilling picture of a system where violence and intimidation are the norm. Guards, often emboldened by a culture of impunity, are accused of subjecting women to beatings, torture, and sexual assault. These acts of brutality are used to maintain control, punish perceived infractions, and crush any sign of resistance. Psychological abuse is equally insidious. Women are subjected to humiliation, degradation, and isolation. They are denied contact with loved ones, deprived of basic necessities, and subjected to constant surveillance. This relentless psychological pressure can have devastating and long-lasting effects on their mental and emotional well-being. The stories that emerge from these prisons are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, but they also serve as a stark reminder of the brutality that thrives in the shadows. The world must shine a light on these abuses and demand accountability for the perpetrators. Section 5. Brittney Griner's ordeal. A high-profile case exposing systemic issues. The arrest and detention of American basketball star Brittney Griner in February 2022 shone a spotlight on the harsh realities of Russia's penal system. Griner's ordeal, while unique in its high profile, exposed the systemic issues that plague these institutions and the vulnerability of foreign nationals caught within their grasp. Accused of drug smuggling, Griner was sentenced to 9 years in a penal colony, a sentence widely condemned as excessive and politically motivated. Her subsequent transfer to IK2, a penal colony notorious for its harsh conditions, only amplified international concern. Reports from Griner and her legal team painted a bleak picture of her time in detention. She endured overcrowded and unsanitary conditions, forced labor, and inadequate medical care. The psychological toll of her confinement was evident in her own words, expressing fear, uncertainty, and a profound sense of isolation. Griner's eventual release in December 2022, secured through a prisoner swap, brought relief but did little to diminish the urgency of addressing the plight of those who remain imprisoned. Her case served as a stark reminder of the human cost of Russia's flawed justice system and the need for continued pressure to ensure the release of other wrongfully detained individuals. Section 6. Political prisoners, silencing dissent behind bars. Russia's women's prisons hold not only those convicted of common crimes but also a growing number of political prisoners. These women, targeted for their activism, dissent, or simply for daring to challenge the Kremlin's authority, are often subjected to even harsher treatment than those convicted of criminal offenses. Their crimes range from participating in anti-government protests, to speaking out against the war in Ukraine, to simply expressing dissenting views online. Their trials are often shams, lacking due process and resulting in predetermined guilty verdicts. Once imprisoned, they face a litany of abuses designed to silence them and break their spirit. They are denied access to lawyers and medical care, subjected to solitary confinement, and threatened with reprisals against their families. Their voices are stifled, their stories hidden behind the walls of Russia's most notorious prisons. The international community must not forget these women. Their plight serves as a stark reminder of the price of dissent in Putin's Russia, and the urgent need to hold the regime accountable for its systematic persecution of political opponents. Section 7. International Condemnation and Advocacy. A Glimmer of Hope. The plight of women in Russian prisons has not gone unnoticed by the international community. Human rights organizations, foreign governments, and individuals have all raised their voices in condemnation of the inhumane conditions and systemic abuses that persist within these institutions. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and other prominent organizations have documented and exposed the abuses, calling for investigations, accountability, and immediate reforms. They have highlighted individual cases, amplified the voices of former inmates, and urged the Russian government to uphold its international human rights obligations. Foreign governments, including the United States and members of the European Union, have also condemned the treatment of women in Russian prisons, particularly the detention of political prisoners. They have imposed sanctions, issued statements of concern, and engaged in diplomatic efforts to secure the release of wrongfully detained individuals. While these efforts may seem like small victories in the face of such a vast and entrenched system of oppression, they represent a glimmer of hope for the women trapped behind bars. Section 8. The Fight for Justice. Demands for Reform and Release. The fight for justice for women imprisoned in Russia's brutal penal system is a multifaceted struggle. It requires a sustained and coordinated effort from international organizations, foreign governments, and individuals committed to human rights. Firstly, there must be relentless pressure on the Russian government to implement comprehensive reforms within its prison system. This includes addressing overcrowding, improving sanitation and medical care, ending the culture of impunity for guards who commit abuses, and ensuring access to legal counsel and fair trials. Secondly, the international community must continue to demand the release of all political prisoners and individuals wrongfully detained on trumped-up charges. This includes diplomatic efforts, targeted sanctions against those responsible for human rights violations, and raising awareness of their cases on the global stage. Finally, supporting organizations working on the ground to provide legal aid, monitor conditions, and advocate for the rights of prisoners is crucial. These organizations, often operating in challenging and restrictive environments, play a vital role in exposing abuses and providing a lifeline to those imprisoned. The fight for justice is an uphill battle, but it is a fight that must be won. The world cannot and must not turn a blind eye to the suffering of these women. Section 9. A Call to Action, Breaking the Silence and Demanding Change. The stories emerging from Russia's women's prisons are a chilling reminder that human rights abuses can flourish in the shadows, hidden from view and often met with indifference. It is easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of the problem, to feel powerless to effect change in a system seemingly impervious to outside pressure. But silence is complicity. We must not allow the voices of these women to be silenced. Each and every one of us has a role to play in demanding justice and accountability. Educate yourself about the issue, share the stories of these women, support organizations working to expose abuses and advocate for change. Contact your elected officials and urge them to take a stand against human rights violations in Russia. Every voice raised, every act of solidarity, no matter how small, chips away at the wall of indifference. Together, we can break the silence, shine a light on the darkness, and demand a better future for the women trapped within Russia's brutal penal system.